Today's date is November 25th, 2022. My name is Zachary Neer, and I'm a 7th grade student at Temple Sinai in Stamford, Connecticut. I will be interviewing my grandma, whose name is Susan, and this is being recorded for the Oral History Archives of the Jewish Historical Society of Fairfield County. Good evening, Grandma.
Hi, Zachary.
Let's start with you telling me your full name.
My full name is Susan Gail Kohlbrenner.
Do you know who you were named after?
Yes, Susan is from my father's father, Sam, and my middle name, Gail, is from my mother's grandmother named Gitta.
Do you have a Hebrew name?
Yes, Sora Gitta.
Do you know where your family was from originally?
Yeah, I do. On my mother's side, on Grandma Sylvia's side, everybody came from Shtetl, which was a village called Shklov, which is now in what's Belarus, but at that point it was in Russia, and it's on what was always referred to as the Dnieper River. Now when you're hearing like news about Ukraine, they talk about the Dnipro, but the Dnipro and the Dnieper are the same river. And on my father's side, my grandparents were from a larger place called Minsk, and that was my grandfather, my father's father, and my father's mother was from a smaller place, but still bigger than Shklov, called Borisov.
Do you know where your family was from originally?
Where was your family from originally?
Oh, it's very complicated because my father's origin and my mother's origin are so different. My father was born in what was then Russia, in Kiev, which is now the capital of Ukraine, and he immigrated to Turkey as a young man to Istanbul. My mother was Sephardic, which means that she is the descendant of the Jews who were expelled by the Spaniards, by Spain in 1492, and settled all over the Near East mostly. So she was born and raised in Istanbul, and her maternal language was Ladino, which is a version of Spanish, which Spanish refugees held on to. My father, on the other hand, of course, grew up in a household where the maternal language, where the house language was Russian and Yiddish. So that's the background of my parents, which incidentally combines the two main branches of Jewish people, my father being Ashkenazi and my mother being Sephardic.
Do you know where your family was from originally?
I know something about where they're from originally. I know on my mother's side, her father's name was Langus, and they were from Lomza, L-O-M-Z-A, Poland. And my grandfather, whose name was Yitzhak, which in English translated to Isidore, came to America probably in the 1890s, and he worked here as a baker and eventually brought over his sweetheart, Fanny Levy, and they married and started a family, and my mother was their first child, and her name was Sadie Langus, but she later changed her name to Sonia because it was more Americanized for her.
Do you know where your family was from originally?
Yeah, my mother came from Russia. She was 2 years old when she came to the United States. And my father's family came from Poland.
Do you know anything about your ancestors' immigration to the United States?
Yeah, I do. My my grandmother came over. She was about 15. And my grandfather was probably about that age. And of course, they didn't know each other when they came over. They met later on. but they were very young, and they came over with, my grandmother came over with her sister, and I don't really know that much about or how my grandfather came over or with whom. But I'm working on that. I'm finding out more information.
When did they come to the U.S.?
Approximately 1900. They were both born in 1885, so they were 15 when they came over, and they were married in 1903, making them 18.
And why did they come?
You know, I think it's the same as every other story you're going to hear. They wanted a better life. They wanted to be safe. And in both cases, they were correct.
And do you know anything about your ancestors' immigration to the United States?
I'm not sure when they came over to the United States. My grandmother was born in 1895. My grandfather was born in 1891. Interesting fact, my grandfather's name was Wolf Kugel, but when he came over to Ellis Island, he had his name changed to, he was named Wolf Kugel, but he changed it to William Cohn. They were both naturalized, my grandfather in 1944 and my grandmother in 1954.
Somewhere around 1930s, maybe?
But they came over?
Yeah.
Probably, yeah.
After they spent some time in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, they received a grant, a loan, to buy a farm in Sharon, Connecticut, along with 30 other Jewish families. The money came from the Baron de Hirsch fund that was resettling Jewish families onto farms throughout the United States. Sharon was a very small community. They lived in the Ellsworth section, and they became dairy farmers.
And then they moved the dairy farm to Connecticut, to outside of Danbury, Ridgebury. And that picture that you're holding was probably taken on that farm in Ridgebury after they moved the farm from New York State or Sharon, Connecticut down to Ridgefield, Connecticut, or Ridgebury, Connecticut, sorry.
They came to Ridgebury, Connecticut, the Ridgebury section of Danbury and Richfield in 1919.
This is great background, thank you. Now I would like you to take out the item that you brought to talk about today.
Well, I'm going to show everybody the item.
Please tell me about this photograph.
This is a picture of my father, Sidney, who you were named after, on furlough, which is like vacation during World War II.
Why is it special to you and our family?
It's a picture of my dad when he came home to visit his family in Brooklyn. And it's special to me because it's a picture of my dad.
Do you have a picture of your artifact?
Do you have any artifacts? Sure. I just happen to have. Now, these are actually very interesting because these are the Shabbat candlesticks that my grandparents that emigrated from Russia brought with them from Russia. And they're not expensive. They're not a whole big deal, but to them they were, and they lit these every Friday night.
What is this artifact? Tell me about it.
Okay, this is called the grandfather's clock. It was made of wood from the Black Forest of Germany. And it's been in my family for probably about 150 years, maybe 160 years. How I wound up with it was when my father graduated high school in 1936. My grandfather took my father back to Poland, where he had not been since he was a little boy, as I told you earlier, to see his parents. And the purpose of doing this was to try to convince his parents to leave Europe and come back to the United States and live in America because of all the pre-war situations that existed in Europe, in Poland specifically, at that time, where the Germans were persecuting the Jews, and he wanted to bring them here where they would be safe, but they decided they wanted to stay there, and that because my great-grandfather, my grandfather's father, had served in the German army in the First World War, he was assured that he would be safe and nothing would happen to him, but unfortunately, they died. So anyway, my grandfather brought this home from Europe.
Now I'd like to ask you a few questions about your life growing up. What was it like? Can you describe your childhood home, neighborhood, friends, family?
Brooklyn had a real neighborhood, so I didn't have to have play dates. I walked outside and I had lots and lots of friends to play with, and we played ball on the stoop and we played games in the street. I had a traditional family. I belonged to a temple, Marine Park Jewish Center. I went to Hebrew school. I was bat mitzvahed. We celebrated Shabbat most Friday nights. We went to temple on all the holidays.
Now I would like to ask a few questions about your life growing up. What was it like? Can you describe your childhood home, neighborhood, friends, and family?
Sure. We lived about 4 blocks from the beach in Far Rockaway, Queens. We lived in a private home on a corner, and we had lots of friends, and I lived about a 5-minute walk from my public school.
How did your parents make a living?
My father worked for the post office. My mom was a homemaker.
What did you and your childhood friends do for fun?
We played hide and seek, we played stickball, we played stoop ball, basketball, and kind of just hung out.
What did you and your childhood friends do for fun?
Well, we had a basket in our yard, which was cement, the yard in the driveway, and we played basketball there, and we turned it around and we played wiffle ball there, and we could hit a home run over the wall, over the fence of the neighbors. So we had plenty of places to play, and could play right in our yard. And there was a terrace, the wall, if you ran too hard to make a basket, you would run right into a brick wall or a stone wall. And thank goodness nobody got hurt.
Now I would like you to pick a Jewish holiday and describe your memories of how you and your family celebrated it when you were a child.
I'm going to say Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the high holidays, because we walked to temple. We never drove to temple, and temple was probably close to 2 miles away. And I always got a new outfit for the high holidays, and went to temple. We sat with grandma and grandpa, and all my friends were there, and we would sit for a little while. And my temple was a block away from a park that had swings and all kinds of playground stuff. So we would sit in temple for a while, and then all the kids would go to the park for a little bit.
Pick a Jewish holiday and talk about how you and your family would have celebrated when you were a child.
Okay, again, we were raised Orthodox. Well, until the dying day, I would put a yarmulke on when I ate at her table, meaning Bubby. Bubby's my mother.
Yeah.
That's your father's grandmother.
Yeah.
Great grandmother.
My great grandmother.
Right. Our holidays. Oh, they were wonderful. First of all, let me tell you the preparation for the Shabbat. Don't forget, we lived in a project. And although we were in a project, that apartment could have been a castle. Came Friday, she started waxing the floors and putting paper down. I wasn't allowed in the house. None of the boys were allowed in the house during Friday. And my job was to sweep the hallway. There were 3 apartments in that hallway. And I was obligated every Friday to go to Richelsofts, pick up the challah. And she would bench candles. And we would have our traditional Shabbat dinner, which I think of it now, how we ate so much.
Now, I would like you to pick a holiday, preferably a Jewish one, and describe your memories of how you and your family celebrated it.
Probably the holiday that was most impressive to me was Passover. And generally speaking, the Seders were held at my grandparents' house, although I might be able to recall one at our own home. Fortunately, in attending the Reishis Das HaShalom, we were able to not only study in Hebrew and be able to read it, but we were able to study Yiddish and learn how to speak it. So when the holiday came, I had the opportunity, because my grandparents were very conversant in Yiddish, to speak their language and to ask the questions in Yiddish.
Okay. When you were a teenager, did you have a bar mitzvah?
I did. As a matter of fact, I brought a copy of my bar mitzvah certificate to show you.
Wow.
And it was signed by my rabbi. And we had the bar mitzvah at the synagogue in Brooklyn, my grandfather's synagogue, which was an Orthodox synagogue, so that the entire ceremony was in Hebrew and Yiddish. There was no English spoken. And I did have a party in the basement of my grandparents' home.
What was most important to you about your bar mitzvah?
What was most important to you about your bar mitzvah?
I guess that it was a rite of passage. Even though I was still a kid, as a 13-year-old is, I knew that this marked a step in the development of a man's life. So I was aware that I was going through an important stage. And in that sense, it was important to me, yes.
So when you were a teenager, did you have a bar or bat mitzvah, a confirmation, or any other celebration? What was most important to you about it?
Go ahead, Michael. You get to go.
I did have a bar mitzvah and eventually a confirmation. It enhanced my Jewish study. I can't say that with a straight face sometimes. Enhanced my Jewish studies. And we had a very learned rabbi, Jerome Molino, who was our rabbi for pretty much 60 years. And I learned a lot about, especially the confirmation, which was done more in English. I learned a lot more about the Jewish traditions and the importance of the Talmud, the Torah, and the Talmud.
I have a different experience. By the way, your grandfather had the measles for his bar mitzvah. He may have forgotten that, but he had the measles.
No, I remember it.
But he went ahead anyway. He continue to have it. I had a different situation in that I was one of the first girls to have a bat mitzvah after many years of women not having them. It was different because we did not read from the Torah. It was a Friday night service from the Union Prayer Book, which was the Reform Prayer Book. We led the service. I did it with a couple of other girls. We read the service. We conducted the service, but we did not do what you would consider a typical bat mitzvah today.
How did you meet Grandma?
We met on a blind date. One of Judy's, your grandma's friends, knew my brother, and they spoke, and they arranged the blind date, and I met your grandma. I came out, it was during the summer, I came out to the house, announced myself. I was driving a Volkswagen, and your great-grandmother, your grandma's mom, was saying, "Oh, he drives a German car." She was suspect, and we laughed. And your grandma and I went out to a place that was like a dance place with a bar, and we talked and we danced and we fell in love.
When you were my age, did you have a favorite radio or television program or movie, and what did you like about it?
Well, I think my favorite radio show at your age was the Yankee Game. They wouldn't have them all on television then. And I used to go to sleep with a transistor radio. You don't know what that is, but it's a radio. Actually, I have one right here. As it happens, they look kind of like this. And I would put this under my pillow at night. So my parents thought I was sleeping, but I was listening to the Yankee games. And my favorite television show was the Danny Thomas Show, and I don't know why. It was funny.
Did anybody in your family serve in the military? If anybody did, tell me more.
Well, I'll go with my parents. Both my mom and dad served in the military. My mom was in the Army. She was in the Air Corps, which was a separate arm of the Army than the Air Force, the United States Air Force, which is where my dad served. So my dad was a major in the Air Force.
Did anyone in your family serve in the military?
Yes. Grandpa served overseas. He was in the trenches he was in the Battle of Normandy, and he was in foxholes in Belgium and London. And Grandma stayed home, and she helped. She worked in a factory rolling bandages for the Army.
Now we're going to wrap up with a few general questions. Okay. What invention has amazed you, and what advice do you have for future generations?
I think that the internet is just the culmination of, I remember, I was talking with Howard last night, that I remember my grandmother had a color TV, one of the first color TVs, and you had to adjust every single color. So you would sit there with the knobs and turn the pink and the red and the yellow and the blue. So it was just crazy. But so you've been born into a digital age that really started when I was already an adult. And I just think it's just wonderful. I think it's wonderful how people can communicate. I think it's incredible that we can sit on Google Meet and we can talk like this. I think it's amazing that you're doing this for, the Stanford Jewish Historical Society. And my advice is just to be nice. And, which is something that I know you do, Emma.
What invention has amazed you in your lifetime, and why?
Oh, what invention? Oh, the phone, of course. For me, it was, I grew up with TV. I grew up with all the electronic stuff and stereos and cars, automobiles, cars, planes. The thing that changed my life, was most amazing, was the phone. Because I remember one of the shows I told you about that I used to watch was Flash Gordon. It was a science fiction show in the early 50s, and they were in outer space and they turned on this machine and they were able to talk back to Earth. And they had a picture. So they were looking at a screen and talking to the screen with a picture. So when I first FaceTime, I remembered that that was like Flash Gordon.
What invention has amazed you in your lifetime, and why?
I would say there's two things. I'd have to say there's two areas that have amazed me most in my lifetime. Number one, space travel. The ability for man to travel into space and make all the accomplishments and discoveries which have helped us over the years. Number two, medical science. I'm just totally amazed by the progress that has been made in medical science over the years. And the best way I can describe that is illnesses that people died from routinely 50, 60, 70 years ago. Today, we have the technology through medical science to make those illnesses nothing more serious than a cold. And we have the capability of curing people that have those issues.
What advice do you have for future generations like me?
Maintain your values, learn as much as you can, and don't be afraid to voice your opinion, and be very respectful of those around you.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
If you're gonna give one piece of advice to future generations like me, what would it be?
I don't know, would you listen to me?
Maybe.
Do what you can to be a good citizen, whether it is voting, paying your taxes, making your bed, helping your little brother or sister, and then you go on to school and you do more good things, and then you become a citizen and you vote and you give blood. Maybe you join the military, or you have to be a good citizen, and that starts at home and it starts at school. So be a good citizen.
Thank you for
I enjoyed it. It was nice talking to you.
What advice do you have for future generations like me?
Oh, just keep your eyes open and keep your hearts open. There's a lot of things happening. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. But don't let any of the technology overwhelm you so that you forget you're a human being, and people and their feelings really count. But nevertheless, keep in touch with what you want and pursue that, because if you're not happy with what you're doing, you're not going to be happy.
Thank you so much for talking with me and letting me interview you today, Nana.
Well, I have to tell you, this has been a wonderful experience for me. Sophie, I love you to pieces.
Love you too.
Pleasure to contribute to your Hebrew education.
Thank you. Thank you for watching and listening. I hope you learned about my family and what his life is, what he grew up with. Thank you again.